everybody. Next up, as we explore conversations around Web3, the next question everyone is asking is how will climate-focused value chains change, shift, adapt in the space and in the age of Web3? We know that reaching the 17 Sustainable Development Goals will cost somewhere in the region of up to $7 trillion. That is an extraordinary investment. So we need to think about ways to bring this alive. And in our next panel, we will learn how climate-focused accounting methodologies, clever fintech initiatives, and digital solutions that are constantly being reimagined will interact with blockchain technology to solve these urgent challenges that affect every single one of us. This panel will be moderated by Nicholas Niggli, the Deputy Secretary General, Republic and State of Geneva. And Nicholas will be joined by Katherine Foster from Green Digital Finance Alliance, Safeya Zeitoun from Tameo, Duncan Brown from Veritree, Michele Soavi from ImpacScope, and Vincent Peikert from NOUMENA Digital AG. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very happy to be here with this group of distinguished panelists to talk about climate-focused solutions and value chains in the age of Web3. This is going to be a super interesting conversation. As a starter, what we will really get into is this very significant question. How do we move from a multi-problem world to a multi-solution, a multi-crisis to a multi-solution kind of future? How do we regenerate our ecosystems? This is going to be at the heart of this discussion. I have an all-star lineup of panelists. They are going to introduce themselves. I could obviously say a few words about them, but I think it's best if they do introduce themselves and in an elevator pitch kind of way, just explain to us how they are making a difference day in, day out. So why don't we start? Katherine.
Thank you. Katherine Foster. I am the Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance, which was established by Ant Forest, or Ant Group, and the United Nations Environment Programme in 2017. And we're focused on bridging the financial sector, digital green finance, with the emerging tech for climate and SDG sector. And we are a not-for-profit located here in Switzerland.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Safeya.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Safeya Zeitoun, and I'm the head of impact for Tameo Impact Fund Solutions. We are an impact investing specialist based in Geneva, and basically what we do is we provide a spectrum of services to support impact investors and fund managers throughout their impact investing journey, with the aim of helping them make evidence-based decisions and have more transparency on the industry.
Thank you very much indeed. Duncan, what about you?
Thank you. I'm Duncan Brown, and I'm from Veritree, and we work with businesses to make their businesses more restorative. So we allow businesses to align their business model with a restorative impact in a verified way, and then publish all of our verified evidence on-chain as an NFT.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Michele.
Hello, everybody. I am Michele Soavi, Chief Sustainability Officer for ImpacScope, where we leverage Web3 technology to create positive impact through methodologies and tools.
And what about you, Vincent?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Vincent Peikert, founder of NOUMENA Digital. We developed a smart contract technology which can be deployed on clouds and on blockchains as well, so kind of infrastructure agnostic. We're using it extensively in MRV, so measurement, reporting, verification, setups, for example, in transportation industry, which we think it's a very important carbon driver. And yeah, happy to talk about that specific case.
Fabulous. So all of those solutions providers will really get into how they are making a difference. Perhaps just as a context in the beginning, this is very much a continuation of a discussion that started at Building Bridges in Geneva. Building Bridges is this multi-stakeholder, transdisciplinary effort that we have established to generate links between finance, the way we transform finance, and global governance. And obviously the climate issue and biodiversity issue crisis are very much part of these debates. And obviously technology has to be part of the key elements we rely on if we want to move faster, much faster in this transition towards a regenerative future. So with that said, I will turn immediately to a first question. And perhaps here I'd like to speak with somebody who just came back from COP. Katherine, can you give us the first impressions from what you've heard? How was it?
The short answer is, a little bit chaotic, but we've made progress. And of course, I'm coming with the lens of having been here in the climate. I'm a former climate diplomat, so I've been here since Kyoto, since the very early days. So we've seen 27 COPs in that period of time. And the big announcement for this COP, of course, was on loss and damage, which came through late last night, which is a really big deal. It's allowing us countries to create a fund to pay for loss and damage to climate catastrophe for developing countries. There's also continued discussions on carbon markets, the pros and cons, the failings of, the capacity of, and of course we were supposed to start the global stocktake this year, which means let's measure country progress towards their goals, but of course we're failing in those goals. And then this year, the difference was the focus on nature-based solutions, climate finance for nature-based solutions, gender and layered sustainable development within that, as well as indigenous knowledge, youth and culture, which was really important because youth are not just seen now as voices, but also as experts and the future holders of the climate initiatives and climate challenges as well.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Are you somewhat disappointed the result isn't going further, or are you sort of still happy? Is the glass sort of half full, or the water bottle half full or half empty?
I think we're drinking from a six-pack, as we say in Canada. I left the Foreign Service, the Canadian Foreign Service, when Canada pulled out of Kyoto. So this is not my first rodeo. I am not disappointed. I'm not optimistic. I don't swing between the extremes. I just want to focus on working with and collaborating with good people on good initiatives. And I think what made me most optimistic was not the discussions and the negotiations that were happening in the extreme security area, but at the pavilion level, where I had two pavilions, the UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub and the Climate Change Coalition Digital Innovation Pavilion. And this is a member community of 360 members worldwide working on blockchain for climate solutions. And there we saw real progress. There we see real collaboration, real initiatives, not only scaling up, but integrating and amplifying impact. So I'm positive still.
Great. We have to be optimistic. We are condemned to be. You believe in systems approaches to overcome these very big, these existential challenges we are facing. How do you see the interface with technology? How can technology accelerate the shift?
That's a great question, and I think everyone here is working and entering at a different systems level approach. And basically it's just looking at any challenge or initiative from that systemic perspective, that there's no top-down answer, there's no bottom-up answer. It really is about and inclusive engagement towards key challenges. This sounds very esoteric, but concretely, what it means is that you can start from a policy initiative that then drives innovation, or you can start from an innovation and technology perspective, which then can drive policy, but also finance, or you can start from a finance initiative, and then that drives some of the other factors. And I come from that because I've sat in the diplomatic and the regulatory world, as well as in the EU climate innovation world with Climate Kick, where we actually pushed forward in initiatives and innovation and how to iterate and bring in different policy mechanisms and technological mechanisms. And for me, technology is across that level, is across the systems perspective. And a final note is just because we've been dealing with climate and SDGs for 30 years, you know, if you think about technology in that time frame, we've gone from rotary phones and, you know, cable television to the technology capacity we have now. So our capacity for monitoring, reporting, and verification is scaled up. Our capacity in fintech is scaled up. Now it's time to really integrate those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Safeya, fintech has been mentioned. I think that's the great bridge towards you. What are the bottlenecks preventing more investment and more private capital from flowing to towards climate finance, especially in developing countries, because that's really where we need to create that big effort, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Thanks a lot, Nicolas. I think it was really interesting that you mentioned at the beginning building bridges, because I think the sentiment that we saw is that the capital is there, right? The money is there, and there are a lot of people who are willing or claim to be willing to invest their money into positive solutions. And a big issue today is that we are facing a world in which there are not sufficient investment opportunities or investable projects for these investors in emerging markets. And that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is a lot of fear, I think, around investing in emerging markets, saying that the risk-return profile is not attractive, etc. And then finally, we reach a bit the piece that we're talking about today, which is a lot of fear of greenwashing as well. So people who want to channel a lot of capital into climate finance want to make sure that that capital actually has a positive outcome and is going towards the areas with the highest potential for impact. And today there is a huge issue around standardization of how we measure financed emissions for projects, how to avoid double counting, how to make sure that this is accurately measured with good quality data. More and more we see that people are trying to take up these efforts, but we haven't reached a point where there's convergence in the approaches. And there's a lot of uncertainty from investors around, well, is this actually having the desired impact, or is it just something that looks nice on paper? And I think that that's where there is a clear opportunity for technology to try to bridge that through monitoring, reporting, and verification solutions that would improve how we see the impact all along the investment value chain.
Super. To deliver this positive externality, to move towards regeneration, obviously you have to be able to calculate exactly what the benefits are going to be, but also where the problems still are. Is it really where you see technology playing a major role?
Well, yes, actually. I mean, it's both sides. It's both the measurement and the verification. I think those are the two pieces where we need support from technology. I don't know yet, and maybe a lot of the people on the panel here today will have a lot more to say about that, but I don't know what is the best way to do that through technology. What is the solution that is scalable, that can be applied at a portfolio level? Because I think today there are initiatives that work on a project level, and what we would like to see is something that is feasible to be implemented at a fund level. When we're talking, and even at a fund-of-fund level, because we work with so many financial instruments, and it should somehow be easy enough for an investor to see what are my financed emissions. Not through stipulation, not through some poorly constructed estimation, but through a really clear and transparent methodology.
Thank you very much for that. We are going to come back to that, but first let's move to Duncan. Duncan, what are the restoration factors that are important in the whole carbon business? Are there blind spots? Are there things we are sort of not looking at enough, and how to get there if that's the case? Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. From my point of view and Veritree's point of view, when you focus just on carbon, we're missing a lot of the human and ecosystem and other important aspects of restoration. For a lot of the projects that we fund, restoration has to include everyone in the community and has to come from a holistic kind of point of view, where we found if you don't have the buy-in of the local community, who's to say the trees will still be there in 25 years? When the trees grow to a large enough size that they can be harvested and used for lumber or other resources, who's to say the community won't choose to do that instead of keeping them in the ground? And we're really looking for a solution that provides permanence to the carbon problem that we're facing today. So it's really important to measure more than just carbon. You need to account for the habitat restoration, the water table improvements, the food security. It needs to be a whole holistic approach to the restoration.
That's great. We in Geneva believe a lot in this notion of PPP squared, public-private partnerships for planet, people, and prosperity. And this obviously sort of calls upon many different stakeholders, but also very much a transdisciplinary approach. Is that a good way to sort of make sense of what you just said in terms of involving different actors?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, we really believe in transparency. And everything that we do, all of the evidence that we collect, all of the data that we collect, we're publishing it on-chain in a way that can be verified and audited by any stakeholder, as well as anyone who's interested in what we're doing. And that's been some of the challenges that we've faced, is like, how do we standardize the evidence that we're collecting and present it in a human-readable way, but also in a way that can be used in other environments too. So there's this clash of, how do we present it in a way that makes sense to like automation and gaming, as well as just the regular Alice and Bob who are viewing the blockchain and checking out our tokens. But we work with Arweave and Cardano and various other solutions to make sure that all the data that we put on chain has been verified by more than just the incentivized bodies who are involved in the restoration. So it's a really multifaceted problem, but yeah, we're looking to make a standard that others can rely on as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Michele, you just heard from Duncan about these limitations and the necessity to really think holistically. We, I think, at the moment are falling short on attaining the SDGs. There are gaps, multi-trillion dollars gaps to really get there. How do you see the main current limitations, and can technology really help there? Where can it really push the envelope?
Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I believe that there's a big problem. Somehow, I would say the big elephant in the room when it comes to impact investing. There's a big disconnect between the amount given and the quantity of impact being created, and it's something you see as an individual, when you're investing into a sustainable investment project, as well as an institutional investor, that it's really difficult to see where your money is gone and what the real impact is. And from my perspective, coming from a financial and operational audit background, I realize it takes time in the sense, okay, when it comes to accounting, it took decades, if not centuries, to develop, a framework which is able to account for financial elements, and therefore it is very likely that it will be somehow similar when it comes as well to environmental and social elements. So For environmental elements, life cycle analysis is somehow recognized as the main methodology to use. There are more significant difficulties when it comes to accounting to social elements. And yeah, for sure, technology can help. But yeah, it takes time, and it cannot be anything that can be done individually. It requires collaboration, because at the end of the day, as it is the case with many blockchain, if everyone is developing their own standards, it's pretty much impossible to compare among different impact projects. So you really didn't accomplish much at the end of the day.
Right. You spoke about time, and it reminds me of a negotiation I had in one of my past professional lives, and I was negotiating with a Chinese delegation, and they jokingly said to me at a certain stage, well, you Swiss, you have the watches, but we have time. I think we have to revise that. Nobody has time, and nobody will win on its own, given the existential crisis we have to face. How can we accelerate, given the very little time we, humanity, do have to essentially transform what we have into something much more regenerative?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my view on there is I totally agree in the sense we need to go faster. The climate change is not waiting for us. We have to be the ones acting. And I think that there is the main point is really open collaboration, and not like having different entities which are working individually and not sharing the outcome of their work with the others, because otherwise, if there are not common practices which are spread among the impact measurement community or impact creation community, then the limitation will always be there, and will always be there, and not much will be accomplished at the end of the day.
So we need more commons, more collaboration, more commons, and possibly digital commons, or maybe certainly digital commons. We're going to come back to that probably.
And possibly also, way to manage the commons which are working.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you very much. Let's move to Vincent. Vincent, why do you focus on transport emissions? Isn't that a too narrow scoped sort of focus? Or is there a deeply systemic, important element here? Thank you very much.
Maybe first of all, I think most of you have been discussing carbon credits at the moment, right? Investing into projects which issue carbon credits, which you could sell. But there's another elephant in the room, which is kind of carbon reporting. And here, many companies, of course, announced zero emission goals, and also there's a lot of regulations coming, especially in the EU, for industries, and transportation industry is one of these industries which is very likely to become mandatory to become carbon zero. And so these companies are forced, but all companies in general, stated carbon zero goals, and they kind of need to care about the supply chain, and also need to report on scope 3, and here the very same problem occurs, that when we think of the transportation supply chain, then you have a lot of carriers and service logistics providers contracting these carriers, and the carriers have sub-carriers, etc. And if they start to report on their carbon emissions, then at the end, let's say a sportswear company needs to report in their scope 3 on what has happened maybe 2 months ago. And then the very same problem occurs that you also mentioned. They need actually, they need to make guesses. They need to make guesses on what contribution maybe had this pair of shoes had in this transportation lane. And And you can imagine how large this inefficiencies and also the inconsistencies are. Like, what is the Kara reporting? What is the Nike, let's say, reporting at the end? And here, if you want to resolve that problem, you would also need something like measurement reporting verification, such that, of course, what we all want, and where also tokens could come in for the emission part, is you want, when the emission happens, you want some certification from a certifier, you know, as precise as possible, and then across the supply chain, you kind of, let's say, transfer a carbon emission token according to the contribution that you know it has, etc. So you have consistency on reporting, which is completely different to what is happening today. But again, that would require to have certification which is trusted by the whole industry, because and that's of course going to be difficult. Nike, to take the example, would have to trust what, let's say, a carrier in Brazil reports, and this requires also this MRV, and this is the large elephant in the room, and a very material one, because transportation accounts to 40% of carbon emissions of consumer companies, and of course optimizing that is as as material as buying carbon credits at the end. So it's all, you know, and if you want to optimize that, you need data, you need very precise data and reports.
So data to certify, to verify. Are the technological tools all built to do this properly? What is missing?
I mean, what is missing basically is, I mean, where we are coming from is companies actually so far didn't want to know anything about carbon emissions or ESG in their supply chain, to be honest. So they basically had like contracts with their next supplier, and these contracts didn't include ESG goals. They basically include, I want to have my pair of shoes on time, and they didn't really want to know what's going on. And that, of course, completely changes now. Now they need to care about what is really happening. And technologically, there is no, data exchange system. So no system where you could exchange data across a supply chain, something like that. And of course, there are also a lot of concerns in supply chains to share data with somebody. So everybody's afraid about data monsters. So it's not easy, to create just one platform where please everybody uploads their data, because I mean, once the data are there might be backdoors from regular, governance to use the data. They are afraid of competition. I mean, there shouldn't be a strong platform in the middle which aggregates all the data. And of course, also competition, which carrier would upload the data if there's some other. So there's a lot of problems. And if you design a system which solves that problem, that really needs to be no data monster. So it really needs to be precisely clear what data are shared with whom on a need-to-know basis, just according to contracts and regulations, etc. And here, concepts like we are discussing here are a very appealing answer to many. And there are also good go-to-market use cases, because now times change. That's what probably you experience when you talk to investors. The big companies are super open to actually change their supply chains, and they can bring those solutions into their supply chains. So the big ones can also, force certain technological solutions all the way down in their supply chain. So very interesting time.
Okay, no data monster, but the necessity to collaborate and to build on what Michele said. There really is this deep need for collaboration. Let me come back to you, Katherine, and talk a bit more on open innovation and collaboration. Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize winner, famously worked on the importance of commons for long-term development. It seems to me to combat this crisis, to really get into this regenerative future, we will have to reinvent the way we use those commons. What's your view on that, and how do you contribute to that?
Interesting. I actually just a few months ago, prior to taking on this new role, I worked with one of the biggest open platforms on Ostrom's theory for DAOs, for the commons. But what we're talking about here, I think, goes beyond just a commons framework, because we have to remember that the commons framework is about, landscape and farming regenerative, where, it's smaller groups of stakeholders, so scaling that up to a global level. I always peel this back to that systemic perspective and collaboration, because each one of my projects from the get-go, including on bunker fuel traceability, on tree planting, on carbon markets, on nested climate accounting, I always come back to the same key issues, and that is the SDGs and climate are about national goals and targets. And so anything underneath that, even the national, the corporate, the subnational, the cities, the individual, are voluntary. And so the data aggregated for that trillions of dollars of what is presented as market opportunity, that market opportunity framing, I think, is what's wrong. It's a collaboration opportunity, because the market opportunity assumes a plug-and-play, ready-to-go type of market, and that's not what we're talking about here. We've had the big problem with the SDGs and climate up until emerging tech came along was that it was fragmented. You had corruption, you had double counting, you had lack of verification. But the culture of innovation didn't shift. And so you had a lot of people in the impact space vying for getting their solution out in front. And we also had the ICO debacle. We also, so we're still experimenting with making progress and collaborating. And to me, the collaboration doesn't necessarily start at that top level with the vision, but largely on the consortia-based projects, because that's when you see the barriers. You see that in the shipping industry, trying to do fuel traceability, you realize the data is still written in a ledger. So tech comes into that if you can scan it. And then actually bringing the market opportunity, where is the market? Well, it's with insurance and risk. So it's about pivoting and taking that systemic entry point to find the right avenue. One of our most recent projects focuses on cities and energy and green mortgages, and just trying to get the data so that people could apply for a green mortgage meant negotiating on privacy, negotiating on those data points. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and it's not necessarily like it takes a great big vision, but having that vision as a focal point and working from the ground up and sharing the problems and barriers that we're facing along the way, that's the commons that will get us to that nested, integrated approach.
That's fantastic. So we need very much a top-down and a bottom-up kind of approach. And both need to essentially come together, if I got you correctly. Thank you. Safeya, what are the main challenges in measuring the environmental impact of investments? This is a big topic. Obviously, there is immediately one starts thinking about taxonomies and the chicken and egg situation there. We had Emmanuel Faber at the Building Bridges conference just recently. Is there an opportunity for blockchain to really make a difference there?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many different things to unpack based on what all of the panelists have said. I mean, yes, we talked about top-down and bottom-up, and then we talked about how corporations should somehow try to impose certain things just by virtue of their size and their power, and then you have governments, etc. So it's a really multifaceted problem, but at the end of the day, I think it's true that really the main challenge is that you want to find one thing that people agree on that is sort of a benchmark for us to work towards. And I think that almost exists in the form of this kind of Paris Agreement goals, the NDCs, etc., that we know kind of where we want to get, but we're not measuring the right things to make sure to what extent we are or are not getting there. All we end up seeing at the end of the day is this is the extent to which global temperatures have increased, therefore we are or are not aligned with those goals. But why that's happening and how we can change that and where the greatest intensity is, that's not really captured, especially in the financial space, because you have so much money that's flowing into different sectors around the world. And we keep saying, yes, transportation accounts for a lot, or food value chains account for a lot, but what are we able to do to divert resources from projects that are causing more harm than good into ones that are more sustainable? And what are we doing to put those projects that are super intensive on a pathway to improve? And I think we're not able to do that if we don't have the right consistent metrics across different value chains, so that we really pinpoint all along, this is where the problem is and this is what we need to do to work on it. So I think bottom line, we need more standardization in the approach of like, this is the one thing we need to be tracking, and have that being done for every industry, for every project from the bottom up, and then having those people at the top tracking that.
Okay.
So I know it was a lot, but
no, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Can we wait until all of those standards? I mean, at the moment there is some sort of a race, I guess. At least that's how we see it, to sort of establish standards. Because in standards diplomacy, obviously, whoever comes first comes up with the benchmark. How do you deal with this in the industry?
I think it's really the people who have the most credibility and the most power at the end of the day that impose the standards. Do we have the time to wait? No, we don't have the time to wait, and I think someone just needs to come up and say, this is what works, and at least you try it. Maybe it's a shot in the dark. I don't think it's a shot in the dark today because we have so much data and so much progress already, but someone just needs to come up and say, this is how we're going to do it, and if it doesn't work, then we iterate, and that's why collaboration is so important, but at least we start somewhere.
Super. Let me move to Duncan. And Duncan, you spoke about the importance of this transdisciplinary approach before, and how you need to involve people in how you intervene in these ecosystems. What's really special? What did you learn? What did you get out of the job you've been doing at the firm you're representing? What's the sort of key learning, and how can we essentially accelerate the movement?
Yeah, so without the community buy-in, there really is no protection for the long-term, growth of the forest. And this can exist in a logging company paying, the surrounding community more money than they get out of the forest, or it could exist in, like forest fires or any large event that would, destroy the growth of the forest forever. So when we're planning any kind of funding or planting project, we look to involve the community from the start. So they are the people who plant. They are the people who selectively cut down and survey the forest. We won't bring outsiders in, because the importance of the education is really what creates the connection between the community and the forest, which then allows for long-term, survivability and the carbon permanence that we're all trying to shoot for. And that was a really, a key learning for myself at Veritree, when I think we have a tendency to oversimplify some of these problems into just easy, sound bites that we can say and they sound great. But in actuality, any forest that we're planting, we're looking to survive for at least 25 years. And that is a much longer timeline than a lot of people think of when they think of planting. It sounds great to say that I planted, 100,000 trees, but if those trees die in a year, that's, more often than not bad for the environment, because of the energy that went in to grow those trees, to transport the trees, to plant the trees. All of that has to be, offset and more. So It really, really is important to involve everyone who's surrounding the forest and educate them and make them see the importance of what we're trying to do here.
So the link between governance and education is absolutely critical. But it seems to me, from what I hear from you, what's really key is also this mutual learning process. You learn from the communities, and they obviously learn from you as well when you intervene. How much do you think the translator job in between those different worlds is critical?
Yeah, it's not only the translator, it's also the learning curve for the community to get on board with our tools. So we and the general we of the Western world are really used to smartphones and cameras and all of the great technology that we've invented, but not everyone in the developing world has ever had a smartphone or had access to a smartphone. So there's a learning curve that comes along with us entering a new region or a new area where we have to train everyone who's going to be planting on all of the tools that we're going to need them to use to prove that the planting actually occurred. And that is an incredibly important task that has to happen, because we're shifting from evidence which used to just be a number on a napkin or in an email or maybe some photos shared in a Google album, but really just general not very compelling stuff, to something that is more we want photos with every planting session. We're tracking the planting sessions through our Collect app. We're also deploying IoT devices to the field so that we can have real live data feed of the tree's growth. It's a much more robust environment that we're trying to build now, and yeah, it's an incredibly important job to make sure that the community understands that what they're doing has a larger impact than just what they see. And with that, yeah, it's incredibly important to make sure that they understand their role in this is as key as everyone else who's in that. Their role is as key as everyone else who's involved.
Thank you very much indeed. Michele, I'd like to talk about an elephant which possibly is still in the room. We speak a lot here about how technology can impact planet and humanity in a positive way, and that's a great conversation. That's a fundamental conversation, I would argue. But what about the sustainability of technology itself? And that obviously comes with the energy consumption, typically of blockchain technology. Is that still a relevant issue, or are we getting the elephant out of the room?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I believe it's more a cultural problem, in the sense that when it comes to the general public with no knowledge of blockchain, when they hear blockchain, they immediately jump to Bitcoin, and they immediately jump to energy consumption. So pretty much everybody knows that the energy consumption of Bitcoin is really high. But yeah, on the other hand, for sure, people in the audience know that other systems are being developed which have an efficiency which is much higher compared to what the Bitcoin used to be, or is, sorry. On the other hand, I always invite people to actually compare the energy consumption to the system we are actually trying to replace. In the sense, well, many times people refer to the narrative that one Bitcoin transaction corresponds to a bit more than 1 million Visa transactions, but they are not really comparable. And to conclude, normally I like to say, like a metaphor, history repeats itself. And nowadays, in crypto, we are like internet at the end of the 80s. So it was really slow, it required quite a lot of infrastructure. And internet right now is still scaling up, is still improving. So I guess it will be a question of time when other solutions will come up with an increasingly better efficiency. But it's a never-ending process. And Bitcoin is just part of what blockchain energy consumption is.
Yeah, so the footprint, if I understood you well, is in the process of diminishing. And there is a clear movement towards an energy consumption which is smaller, and that obviously has to do with the change also from proof of work to proof of stake. I guess that is what you mentioned. Yeah. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah. And the change in order of magnitude, it's many different orders of magnitude of difference. Then you may argue there are some blockchains which are called blockchains, but they're technically centralized, like BNB is based on 9 nodes, so their energy consumption is really low. But then you may argue, is it really a blockchain if they have 9 nodes which are validating all the transactions? So it's always also a question of trade-off.
Thank you very much indeed. Vincent, you spoke about these difficulties and that shift towards competition, which is very hard, frankly speaking, to make because of all of the competition elements and the lack of trust in the industry, in the transport industry, which you have eloquently addressed before. How do you think the industry would adapt MRVs and carbon token concepts? Do you think they would be open to something like that in the framework of Web3?
Yeah, I think on the carrier level and on the maybe even LSP level, so there are the carriers, the LSPs and the shippers. I think here at the moment it's really kind of difficult. I mean, they have they are not, really not used to share data on a high frequent basis. They have their own systems, legacy systems. It's not easy. But on the shipper level, like the large shippers, like again Nike maybe, or Apple, they they need to collect the data anyways at the moment, yeah. And what we do at the moment is to provide some standard tools, some cleaning algorithms that make it easier for them to kind of collect the data from however they collect it today, because they now want to do it not just once a year but monthly, so they need some automation. And based on that, we start also adding value by starting to optimize, so making suggestions like you could exchange aviation for rail. So we start to add some value at high level, because we have an advantage in the industry that there are already some kind of reporting standards, but they are super high level and not precise, but they are kind of widely adopted, and that's also then the next step for us, to go from this, like we collect all the data for the shipper, towards this other model where we gather the data directly from the supply chain, because there is already a standard which is accepted, so we can introduce this carbon emission token, because it would be accepted. But then the next step would be to get more precise. Once you have this decentralized system where you can where it's accepted, you can start to become more precise. For example, a very big topic in Germany is the use of hydrogen, and there maybe the loop closes. Here there's a lot of uncertainty about verification of hydrogen in Germany, which blocks a lot of investments. I mean, given how huge this topic is, because there would really be from, let's say, TÜV Nord certified hydrogen, which would be then used by the big companies. That must happen really on the decentralized level. So we would start slowly to more and more introduce then MRV verifications other than this high-level standard. And I think that's really indeed a go-to-market and something which would work immediately and can be done. Yeah. And the trick would be the large shippers again. They would push it into their supply chains. I think that way one can establish new systems.
Well, thank you. We spoke a lot about time and time essentially running out. Our time has run out. I would propose we all offer the panelists a round of applause, a hearty round of applause, and thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our panel, and I thank you very much indeed for your attention. We have to go.